This story today is so dark, it makes your chest tighten set against a blistering prairie where silence feels heavier than screams. It's a place where fate crosses paths with cruelty and mercy arrives when it's least expected. It begins with a single decision, small, quiet, and almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change a life that was meant to be broken. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. She lay bound beneath a merciless sun, limbs forced wide, screaming without sound. Not the kind that tears from the throat, but the kind that breaks inside your head after your voice is already gone. Clara Wynne was only 19, barefoot, caked in dust, drifting in and out of consciousness. Her wrists were hauled straight above her head, her ankles dragged apart until the ropes bit into raw skin. She had been left there like livestock, abandoned to the heat until her will gave out. Most of the Dry Creek folk would have passed her without slowing that day. The prairie was vast and unforgiving, a place where people learned to look away. But if you'd been there, you would have noticed her eyes, first wide-glazed, filled with terror. The look of someone who had already accepted she wouldn't be leaving that field alive. Wind drove grit into her face again and again. She couldn't lift a hand to wipe her tears. Her throat burned shredded and dry. She kept whispering, please, though no one was listening. You ever see someone so completely broken that your chest tightens before your mind can catch up? That was Clara, left to bake under the sky by the one man who should have protected her. Her stepfather, Wade Kincaid, a hard, drunken brute who worked little, drank plenty, and believed a girl existed for one purpose only. After her mother, Eliza Wynne, died, he decided Clara would take her place. When she refused, he dragged her to the far edge of his land and tied her to a fence post like this. Told her she'd learn obedience before sundown. Hours crawled by. The world shimmered like boiling water. Her mouth turned to dust. Her legs shook so violently, the ropes rattled against the wood. She thought she heard buzzards overhead, but she was too weak to raise her head. Then something shifted. The ground began to tremble. At first it was distant, then closer. One horse moving fast, dust lifting behind it. The rider reined in hard when he saw her, Silas Crow, 47 years old. A rancher who had weathered drought, death, and every hard lesson the West could teach, yet nothing had prepared him for the sight of a young woman tied out like bait beneath open sky. He froze in the saddle, not from fear, but from disbelief. He dismounted slowly, boots pressing into brittle grass. Clara tried to speak. Nothing but air escaped her lips. Silas dropped to one knee beside her. His shadow finally gave her a sliver of relief. He touched the rope at her wrist. It was soaked dark with sweat and blood. He scanned the empty prairie, half expecting some creature to crawl out of the grass. Then he spoke 5 quiet words. Words she would never forget. No one deserves this. He reached for his knife. The instant he cut her free was the instant her life split in two. What came after could save her or destroy her. And that leaves a question worth asking. If you were that rancher standing in that heat staring at that girl, what would you do? Ride on or step into trouble most men never walk away from? When Silas sliced through the last rope, Clara pitched forward. He caught her before she hit the dirt. Her body felt weightless, hollow, like terror had carved her out from the inside. He lifted her onto his horse with the careful grip of a man holding something fragile he couldn't mend, but refused to drop. The ride back to the Crow place was long and heavy. The prairie stretched on, forever hot and silent, broken only by Clara's uneven breathing. Silas spoke softly the whole way, never pressing, never asking. Just simple words: you're safe. Stay awake if you can. Most men out here spoke loud and rough. Silas Crow spoke like someone afraid of spooking a wounded animal. That was exactly how Clara Wynne felt. Crow Ranch sat along the bend of the Arkansas River, a modest spread that still held together mostly because Silas Crow worked it harder than a man his age should have. When he carried Clara through the door, the elderly housekeeper, Ruth Fletcher, took one look and nearly dropped the kettle in her hands. She jabbed a finger toward the spare room and said, "Lord above, lay that girl down before she burns up." Clara was barely aware of her surroundings, lips split and dry, her shirt stiff with sweat and dust. She looked like someone punished for the simple act of staying alive. Ruth tended her injuries slowly, cleaning each scrape and welt with care, while Silas fetched water and fresh cloth. He stayed back near the doorway, one hand resting on his belt, careful not to crowd her. Most men would have watched too long. He didn't. His gaze stayed low, like he needed permission just to be useful. When Clara finally stirred, the sun was sinking behind the barn, casting long shadows through the window. For a heartbeat, panic seized her. She thought she was still tied out in that field. Then she noticed Silas sitting beside the bed, slumped in a chair, his hat tipped forward as he slept. Without the dust and strain etched into his face, he looked older, somehow quieter, almost kind. She whispered a single question, "Why did you help me?" Silas woke, rubbing his eyes, studying her for a long moment. His answer came steady. Because someone should have done it years ago. Clara tried to rise, pain flaring along her ribs. Silas moved closer at once, slow and careful, making sure she didn't recoil. He eased her back against the pillows and pressed a glass of water into her hands. She drank like it was the first water she'd ever known. Maybe it was. That night she woke shaking, heart-hammering, convinced she heard Wade Kincaid's boots in the hall. Silas sat just outside her door, hat resting in his lap. He didn't step inside. He only said quietly and calm that she was safe, and he'd stay right there until morning. She cried without sound for a long while, before sleep finally claimed her again. Something shifted then, a fragile spark of hope. Not enough to trust, not yet, but enough to breathe without trembling. Even so, she knew her stepfather wasn't finished. A man like that never lets go easily. And trouble was already taking shape. Once Wade realized Clara wasn't where he'd left her, it didn't take long. Men like him believe the world owes them. When he rode back to the field and found only severed ropes and footprints pressed into the dirt, his face burned red like hot iron. He kicked the fence post until it rattled. He spat and swore he'd drag her back no matter who stood in his way. By the following afternoon, he was riding hard toward Crow Ranch. Folks at the general store said he drove that worn-out horse like the devil was at his heels. As if sensing it, Clara sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. She was still weak, but her eyes were clearer now. She kept watching the horizon as if expecting danger to appear out of the dust. She wasn't wrong. Silas stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw Wade charging down the dirt road and muttered the kind of words ranchers reserve for broken fences and bad storms. Wade swung down from his horse and climbed the steps without hesitation. Clara shrank back, but Silas stepped forward calm and unyielding, like a man ready to face a raging bull, even if it meant getting trampled. Wade Kincaid jabbed a finger toward Clara Wynne, shouting about blood ties, old promises, and what he called his rightful claim. Silas Crow didn't so much as blink. He crossed his arms, planted himself like a load-bearing post, and answered with the kind of daylight truth that doesn't bend. Clara wasn't property. She wasn't a wife to be claimed. And she sure as hell wasn't leaving with him. Wade's voice rose, then loud enough to send the chickens scattering behind the barn, but Silas never raised his own. He stepped forward a single inch, met Wade's stare, and said a sentence that drained the yard of sound. "Lay a hand on her again, and you answer to me first and the law after." Wade tried to hold the stare, but Silas Crow carried the kind of weight that makes other men remember where they stand. After a long beat, Wade backed off, swung into the saddle, and rode away. He kept glancing over his shoulder. Men like him don't leave without planning. Inside the house, Clara finally drew a full breath, though she knew it wasn't finished. Silas knew it too. That night, when he passed behind her chair to grab his coat, she flinched so hard her cup nearly slipped. He stopped at once, took a step back, and apologized, though he'd done nothing wrong. Clara murmured that she didn't mean it. Silas told her healing doesn't run on a clock, and no one would rush her under this roof. Trouble has a way of circling back, especially when it's been embarrassed. Wade rode off from Crow Ranch that afternoon, but the way he held the reins said he wasn't done. A man like that doesn't swallow pride. He chokes on it, then spits it at the nearest target. 2 nights later, the trouble came. It started soft, the sound of a horse somewhere beyond the dark. Then another behind it. Silas stood on the porch with a lantern checking the screen door hinges when he heard them. He set the light down, listened, and called inside to stay close. Ruth Fletcher peered from the kitchen and whispered that something mean was riding the wind. She wasn't wrong. The gate creaked. 2 riders slid into view. Wade rode point, and behind him sat a man who looked dangerous, even in shadow. Tall, sharp-eyed, a leather vest, worn supple by too many bad nights. Folks knew him as Cole Mercer, the kind of hired gun who saved words because bullets spoke cleaner. They pulled up near the barn. Wade yelled that he'd come for what was his. Cole stayed quiet in the saddle, one hand near his iron and the other tapping his thigh like he was already bored. Silas walked down the steps. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for his gun either. He set his boots, squared his shoulders, and stood as if the whole place leaned on him. Wade barked again that Clara belonged to him. The yard went dead still. Even the chickens froze like they understood the risk. Silas answered calm and slow, the kind of slow that makes a man rethink his next breath. "Clara is free here," he said. "And she's staying." That was enough to set it off. Cole Mercer swung down from his horse, his revolver already halfway clear of leather. Clara Wynne sucked in a sharp breath from the doorway. Silas Crow lifted one hand, not loud, not rushed to quiet warning. Then the night shattered. Cole fired first. The report cracked the air. The round tore across Silas's upper arm, ripping cloth and drawing blood. He rocked back a step, teeth, set hand clamping down on the wound, but he stayed on his feet. Cole fired again. The shot went wide when Wade Kincaid lurched sideways, dirt bursting up and throwing Cole off his line. In that heartbeat, Silas steadied, dropped his aim, and sent a round into Cole's shoulder. The impact spun him down. He hit one knee, his gun spilling into the dust. Wade charged, howling curses. Silas snatched a rope from the fence, cast it clean, and the loop snapped tight before Wade knew he'd been caught. One hard yank sent him face first into the ground. Later, Ruth Fletcher said she wished she'd clapped, but her hands shook too badly. By dawn, both men were bound to their saddles, bruised and battered, while Silas drove them toward Dodge City to face Marshal Owen Black. Clara watched them vanish down the road. Her breathing was uneven, but her eyes were brighter than they'd been in years. And the question hung there all the same. What happens when a girl who has only known fear is finally given the chance to build a life of her own? And what does she choose once her heart begins to mend? Silas rode back from Dodge City just before noon. The sun felt warm, not cruel like the day he found her. His horse moved easy, almost content, as if it knew the worst had passed. When he reached the yard, Clara stepped out slowly, unsure whether to smile or cry. maybe both. Silas dismounted and placed the reins in her hands. His voice was gentle. "It's done. The marshal has him. They won't trouble you again." The Dry Creek folk were already whispering that Wade might face the rope come spring, though nobody put much faith in courts back then. And Cole. Some swore they saw him limp out of the jail 2 nights later, blood seeping through his coat as he headed south toward Texas. Stories run fast out here. Truth takes its time. For now, Wade sat in a cell staring down the kind of justice he never believed would find him. And wherever Cole ended up, he'd remember this ranch every time his shoulder ached. Clara held the bridle like it was something sacred. For the first time in a long while, her hands didn't tremble. The days that followed felt different, lighter. A calm settled over the place, wrapping her like a worn quilt. She hauled water to the barn. She brushed the horses. Her fingers worked through tangled manes with quiet purpose. When Silas showed her how to mend a fence, she laughed the first real laugh he'd ever heard from her. Small but alive. Healing doesn't hurry. It walks. And you could see it in her. Each morning she stood a little straighter. Each evening she spoke a little more. She began to believe she had a place in this world, one not built on fear, but on her own choosing. One afternoon by the river, she said something simple. "I feel safe here." Silas nodded. "Safety's the first step," he said, "not the last." She asked him what came after that. Silas Crow gave a small, worn smile, the kind men earn after too many hard seasons, and said it was living. Really living. The kind where you choose who you are instead of carrying the shape someone tried to force on you that night. Clara Wynne stood on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the cottonwoods. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in backbone. The world had stripped nearly everything from her, and still she stood there, piecing herself back together on a ranch that smelled of hay and warm earth. Maybe that's the truth hidden inside her story. A person can be dragged into the deepest dark. Left alone, hurt, shaking, certain they'll never stand again. But the human heart is stubborn. It reaches for light even when it barely remembers what light feels like. It grows back slow, steady. Each time someone offers a little kindness. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deep fakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.